I am Marin Calder, and I am 32 years old, living in Hollowport, Oregon, a quiet coastal town where the mornings smell like salt and the lighthouse keeps a patient watch over the boats and the gulls that mindlessly wheel above the harbor. I am not famous, not dramatic, just a person who believes in small rituals and stubborn routines, the kind of person who keeps a notebook of ideas, a habit of walking the pier at dawn, and a stubborn belief that if a life is to be rebuilt, it must be done with steady hands and patient breaths. My world had been steady for a long stretch of time, or at least it felt that way, until the day the signs began to pile up like broken shells on the shore, and I learned that the life I had built with another woman, my partner, was not built alone within the walls of our small cottage by the ferry docks, but was shared with someone else who did not ask permission to trespass. The partner I trusted, the person who had become the most familiar echo in my daily room of thoughts, was Noelle. And in the mornings when the light slid through our curtains, I believed we stood at the edge of a shared future, a life that could bend but not break under the weight of what was meant to be ours. Then one evening, the door did not creak open with the usual tired greeting, and messages that should have stayed between us flared up on the glow of a screen, and I found the truth waiting for me in a way that surprised my own courage and then tested it at every turn. The discovery came not as a roaring thunderclap, but as a slow, sinking ache that slid through the kitchen as I stood there with a cup of tea that would never again taste the same. And the words Noelle spoke when she tried to quiet the room with predictable excuses did not soothe, but instead sharpened the knife of doubt that I had been keeping at bay for months. It was in that moment that I realized our home, once a harbor of safety, had become a place where secrets could lie like shoals just beneath the surface and threaten to pull a person under if one did not swim away fast enough. The revelation did not arrive with the dramatic flourish of some grand mistake, but with a dozen small alerts, a string of overlooked messages and half-whispered apologies that did not feel like apologies at all. And the biggest truth that glowed in that dim kitchen was this: Noelle and a coworker of ours had crossed lines that should never be crossed, and I was the person left to pick up the broken pieces and decide how to move forward when everything I believed in about our life, about trust, about what a relationship could be, felt suddenly fragile and unsure. So I did what I have always done when the world grows too loud for one heart to carry alone. I stood up, I breathed in the cold air that slid through the window and into the room, and I said to myself that the only power I possessed in that moment was the power to choose what comes next. The morning after I packed a few essentials, slipped out as Noelle slept, and the little apartment hummed with the quiet that follows a confrontation you do not wish to repeat, and I did not leave a note, because I believed a note would be a poor apology and a poor shield. I left with a decision carved into the line of my spine, a declaration that I would not stay where I was not valued, that I would not pretend that the air in that shared space was clean enough to breathe when it carried the scent of betrayal. I am a person who believes in dignity even when it hurts, and so I told myself, as I stood on the sidewalk with my bags, that the truth about love is not that it cannot fail, but that a person must choose how to end a chapter when the ending would otherwise choose you. Noelle tried to reach me after, sending messages that attempted to pull me back with the soft voice of someone who knew how to cloak a lie in a gentle tone, and I ignored those messages as best I could, blocking her on every avenue because I needed to reclaim the space the betrayal had stolen from me. I was not angry with Noelle in the sense of seeking vengeance so much as I was tired of living in a story that did not belong to me anymore, a life that belonged to two people who did not share the same values or the same respect for the truth. And I needed to reclaim the person who had been hiding behind the curtain of a comfortable relationship rather than facing the discomfort of an honest one. The second day after the breakup, during a lunch break at work, I ran into Derek, the coworker who had become a symbol of many things I wished to forget. Derek had a way of looking at a person that felt like a constant test, a challenge that asked if I would break under the weight of his disingenuous calm. He did not look sorry when he spoke about the situation. He spoke as if the world had already decided that what happened was simply a curious accident, a one-time event that could be dismissed with a shrug and a casual smile. And in that moment, his words turned into a kind of blade that cut through the thin veil of my grief. He told me without apology that he liked my girlfriend, that he did not intend to apologize. And for a fraction of a second, the old impulse rose in me, the need to confront a threat with the same force I would bring to a fight on the street, the instinct to make him understand the depth of the damage he had caused. But I was in a place where I knew that loss and violence would not rebuild what was broken. I would only become a person I would not recognize if I let rage drive me into a new mistake. So I did the only thing I could do with a voice that trembled but did not waver. I told him that if he wanted a future with Noelle, he could have her, and I walked away with a plan to speak to human resources about what I had discovered, not to ruin a life, but to protect others from a similar wound, and to make certain that the boundaries of this company and this town remained intact for people who did not deserve to be dragged into someone else's drama. The coworker, whose name was Derek, did not try to cry out his innocence or explain away the situation in flowery terms. He simply shrugged, as if to say that life was merely a chessboard, and we were all just pieces that moved where we pleased. But I knew enough about life to understand that the game has rules and consequences, and I would not be one of the pieces crushed under someone else's disregard for those rules. After that day, Derek was moved to a different team, not permanently banished from the company, but separated in a way that felt almost ceremonial, as if the town itself wanted to remind us that certain bridges should not be burned in the middle of a storm. The management explained that they would transfer him to a different branch as soon as an opening appeared, and I watched as the two teams drifted apart like two ships on a foggy morning, not completely out of sight, but no longer sharing the same harbor. It was a relief and a sorrow at once, a small mercy that the day-to-day contact would not be the constant ache inside my chest, but it did not erase the fact that a wound had been left behind, one that would take time to heal and would from time to time reopen in places I did not expect. As for me, I began the hard work of rebuilding my life in a quiet, ordinary way that felt heroic because it was so unspectacular. I signed a lease for a small studio in town, a space that was mine to shape from the wood floor up, a room that would become a sanctuary where the memory of what happened could be filed away like a photograph in a drawer that one opens only when the day is long and the heart needs to remember how far it has come. I started crashing with a friend for a short while, not because I enjoyed being a burden, but because I needed time to think in spaces that were not our shared home, because I believed that healing required a light touch, a chance to step back from the drama and let the truth unsnarl itself. The lease sign was a quiet ceremony, a promise to myself that I would not let fear dictate the terms of my life, and already the small room felt like a lighthouse in the darkness, a place from which I could observe the world without being overwhelmed by it, a place where I could practice the art of living alone without feeling abandoned by the idea of love. I also began to focus more intensely on myself and my work. I work in Hollowport, a town where the sea wears the sky like a coat and the mornings arrive with a soft hush, and there is a job I love, a routine that allows me to breathe again. I do not speak of romance to anyone for a long time, not because I have forgotten the ache, but because I know romance will find its own season, and I am listening now for the season that is meant to belong to me. In the weeks that followed, I found a way to ground myself in the things I could control, and that began with the simple act of getting out of bed with purpose and tending to the day with quiet discipline. I cooked meals that tasted like safety. I kept the apartment clean in a habit that felt almost ritual, and I kept walking along the pier after work as if each step were a small exhale of release. I learned to resist the urge to punish Noelle or Derek with public exposure, and instead I turned my attention to the work of reclaiming the life that had been dented but not destroyed, a life that would still hold light and possibility within the lines of its ordinary days. The town of Hollowport offered its own lessons. People whispered concerns in the back rooms of the coffee shop, and some looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and curiosity that follows a person who has had a painful revelation. But most of the town kept to its routines, and I found comfort in that steadiness, the sense that the world does not stop when a door closes. It only shifts a little, letting the person inside decide how to move forward. I learned the difference between escaping and choosing a new direction. Escape would have meant leaving Hollowport, starting over somewhere far away where the memories of the old life would fade under distant horizons. Choosing a new direction meant staying, planting roots in a soil that still bore the weight of my past, and growing something new from it anyway. I shared some of this with a trusted friend, Mia, who had stood by me in the early days when I refused to let despair own me. And she listened with a patient, honest heart, asking questions that did not pretend to know the answers, but loved me enough to help me find them. The hardest truth I faced during these months was not the betrayal itself, but the way in which I had learned to carry the ache in secret, the way I had learned to pretend that I was fine when a part of me was not only broken but disoriented, as if I walked around with a map that no longer matched the landscape. I refused to let that happen again. I set small, tangible goals for myself that would remind me I still had agency. I saved money for the studio, I planned repairs and decor on a budget, I learned to care for potted plants and a tiny balcony garden that reminded me what it felt like to nurture something that would grow in spite of the weather. I did not resent Noelle for moving on, but I did not pretend the absence of excuses would erase the hurt. The process of healing, I discovered, is not a straight line, but a path that curves, loops, and sometimes doubles back. And the path took me to a place where I stood at the edge of a new decision. A decision to confront the pain not with vengeance, but with honesty and resolve. The turning point came on a late autumn night when I walked the boardwalk with the wind in my hair and the ocean answering back in a chorus of waves that sounded like 1,000 whispered apologies to the sea itself for the way we humans sometimes treat each other. It was then that I realized the final act of the old life would be not a loud confrontation, but a quiet, purposeful act of closure that would seal the wound and let the rest of my days heal without the heavy shadow of that betrayal. The final act of the story begins with a plan that comes from a place of quiet strength rather than bitterness. I decide to face the memory of the two who betrayed me not with anger, but with a careful, honest demonstration of what I am capable of when I refuse to shrink. I prepare to go to the old apartment to collect belongings, not to humiliate anyone, but to reclaim the space that was mine and to bring it to a cleaner, clearer ending. A last gesture of control that says I am moving forward on my own terms. I arrange a meeting with HR and with the landlord to ensure that the process is orderly, and I tell myself that if there is a chance to prevent someone else from suffering a similar fate because of a lack of boundaries, I will take it. When I stand in the apartment doorway with boxes that will become part of my new life, the air feels like salt on a wound, but I do not allow sorrow to overwhelm me. I let it inform me, to remind me of why I am choosing this path and what I am hoping to protect by taking this step. Noelle is not there, and Derek is not there, but memories present themselves with their own stubborn persistence, and I greet them with a calm that I have worked to foster, the kind of calm that comes from knowing I have done the work and that I can continue to do so. I tell the landlord that I will not be returning, that I want the place cleaned and cleared of any reminders, that I want a fresh start, and I receive an unexpected, almost gentle nod from the man who has seen more renegotiations than he cares to admit. At that moment, I realize that the ending I feared might be complicated has, instead, become a clean slate, an opportunity to write my own narrative without the old chapters shadowing my handwriting. The parting is not dramatic. It is practical and dignified, and as the last box leaves the doorway, I feel a current of relief too strong to ignore. Afterward, I stand on the boardwalk in the glow of the streetlights and listen to the sea, and I think of the people who have helped me along the way. Of Mia, who asked the questions that helped me see the truth I was avoiding, of my friend who lent me space to breathe and begin again, and of the slow way the town accepts a person who has walked through their door with a broken heart, but a stubborn desire to heal. The space I move into is modest, but it is mine. A tiny studio with windows that catch the early light in the morning, a balcony where I can water the few plants that survived the move, and a shelf that will hold the notebook in which I write what I am learning about the heart, and about the courage it takes to stand still long enough to see what must be done. I have not become immune to the ache, but I have learned to live with it as a part of my life rather than the entire story. And I have learned to tell it in a way that does not demand the attention of everyone, but that asks only for the honest listening of the self. The new life, if I am honest, feels strange at times, and there are nights when the quiet is loud enough to remind me that I am alone, but not lonely, because I have found a way to fill the space with work. with small rituals, with a commitment to remind myself that I am worthy of fidelity to myself and to the possibility of a future that belongs to no one but me for a while. The truth I arrived at after all these months is not that love cannot be broken, but that love can return once it has learned to wait in the wings, and that a person can recover a sense of self and even a sense of humor after the hardest storm. I do not pretend the road ahead will be simple, and I am not naive enough to think that the wound will vanish overnight. What I know is this: I can walk into Hollowport every day with my head held a little higher, my steps a touch more confident, because I have faced the shadow and walked out the other side with a plan that is mine alone. The town does not forget easily, and I will never forget what happened or how it forced me to grow. But I also understand now why a life can still hold beauty after betrayal, why the sea keeps returning to the shore even when the tide has pulled away the last piece of the day's light, and how a person who has been broken can choose to become something more resilient, more honest, more capable of loving again, but this time with clear boundaries and a wiser heart. If there is a twist to this ending, it is not a dramatic reveal of some secret plan hatched to ruin others. It is a quieter twist, a realization that forgiveness is not for the others alone, but for the self who carries the weight of what happened and chooses to release it, a wind-changing course that allows a new future to rise. The last thing I want to say is that there is a part of this story that belongs to Hollowport as much as it belongs to me, a town that continues to breathe even when a single life has a difficult season. Should you ever hear a warning in your own life that something is missing, I urge you to listen with a calm heart and a clear mind. For trust is not a trap to be protected from the world, but a fragile thing that must be tended with care. And when the world shows you a betrayal, you have the power to decide how to respond, how to rebuild, and how to choose the right path for your own peace. And in my case, that path led to a quiet studio by the sea where I learned to live with honesty, to move forward with almost a new tenderness toward myself, and to keep walking toward a future where the lessons learned do not define me, but refine me, and where the horizon always promises a new morning, even after the longest night.